Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are the Cannabis Coaching Institute, and we talk to people about all the benefits of cannabis, which is why this particular meeting is so important because, as you probably already know, we read headlines all the time that are talking about the dangers of this evil plant. And we have to figure out how to conquer that as people who care about the plant or as people who are out there doing this as their profession. All right. I put the handout in the chat. It has the link to the New York Times article. It has a bunch of resources. So tonight on this call, we're going to cover three things. What did the New York Times article actually say? Is it all true? And finally, how do we as advocates for the plant and as professional coaches and educators, how do we deal with this? My name is Andrea Meharg. I've been teaching for an obnoxious amount of time, and I myself graduated from the Cannabis Institute back in 2018. And since then, I have been on a mission to teach the world about the benefits of this plant. I immediately started my coaching business and doing education. One of the things I'm most proud of is that I wrote the curriculum that a medical cannabis company in the States called VeriHeal uses to train its physicians when they are looking to recommend medical cannabis. So I feel very attached to how beneficial this plant can be because I've deeply, deeply studied it. And so this article, made me so angry. And I am also the program director at the Cannabis Institute. And we are so happy to bring this call to you tonight. Okay, why does this all matter? Why are we here tonight? Why are we giving up our time to talk about this? If you're willing and able to say, medical cannabis really helps me, or cannabis really helps me, or THC really helps me with these things, if you're able and open and willing to talk about that to the real world, people are going to come back at you with things that they're reading or hearing in the media often and say, oh my gosh, I just heard that cannabis is really bad for your heart. Or I heard that if you consume cannabis as a teenager, then you're definitely going to get schizophrenia. And that comes at us a lot. And we need to know how to deal with that. Some of the stuff is true, right? This plant isn't going to fix everything. And there are problems. People do have problems by using the plant incorrectly or just not being able to tolerate it. So we have to look at this from a measured view. So it's not just about this, it's about how to deal with this when it comes up for you in your life. If you are a cannabis coach and educator, like it comes at you a lot. I get a lot of emails from people who are like, hey, did you see this? So get ready for it. We're just going to dive in. Okay, it's called The Review of Medical Cannabis Use Finds Little Evidence of Benefit, and it's referencing a study that was published in JAMA. So the whole article is about this one study. This study covered about 15 years of studies. This review from JAMA was run by some addiction experts. And they reviewed clinical trials and guidelines and surveys, mostly from the USA, and this is important later, and some from Canada. They studied only THC and CBD, although we know cannabis has 500 active plant compounds. They were just narrowing it down to these two. And they were studying both prescription medication and what you could get on the medical markets. This review focused mostly on pain, sleep, and anxiety. And those are three things that people come to this plant for often. In the end, they drew two main conclusions. The first one is that cannabis often has weak or inconclusive evidence to support its benefits. And I, like right then, in the very first paragraph, I was stunned because that's just not true. And second one, just to make us all scared, is that nearly 30% of medical cannabis users are going to develop what's known as cannabis use disorder. And that already sounds bad, right? Like, oh my God, a third of us are going to get this. And that was just the beginning. So if you're like me and you're just one paragraph into this article, a bunch of things are like pinging in your head. My spidey sensors were like, what is going on? Does the New York Times hate cannabis? First of all, the review was done by addiction experts. So they already have a certain lens of looking at cannabis, and that's fine. People can become addicted to cannabis. It's just that instead of coming at it from, pediatricians who are using cannabis in their practice or something, this is from people who already have maybe a particular point of view about this plant. Like I said, they only studied THC and CBD, which leaves out a lot of beautiful plant medicine and this 30% thing. Well, you're going to find out. It's kind of half true and totally inflammatory that they put this into the article. We're going to dive into the main article now. The evidence does not support the use of cannabis or cannabinoids at this point for most of the indications that folks are using it for. That makes zero sense because millions of people are using cannabis to help with conditions and they're finding it useful, which is why they still use it. And we have been using cannabis as humans for thousands of years. It's just this past 100 years of prohibition where we have come to learn, quote unquote, that cannabis is dangerous. We knew for millennia that cannabis was beneficial. So are these studies saying that all of this is wrong? It just doesn't make any sense at all. They also said that they found a huge gulf between the health purposes for which people say that they're using this plant and what gold standard science shows about its effectiveness. But they forget to mention that the reason that cannabinoids cannot be studied under the gold standard is because of prohibition. The researchers can't study the plant the way that it needs to be done because for 100 years, due to racism, greed, and propaganda, we have kept this plant, especially in the States, under prohibition. So that means that the researchers that are getting funding and have been getting funding out of the US for a very long time, they have been mostly funded by NIDA. And because of that funding, which is federal, they are only allowed to study plants that are grown at one specific university. It used to be this way. It's just changed in the past couple of years, but for years, dozens of years, one particular university, and this university consistently put out plants that were low THC, full of seeds, and oftentimes moldy. So researchers have been studying a plant that looks nothing like what people were able to grow or obtain on their own and what people are using in their own homes even today. So it's hard to ask for randomized controlled trials when we are not providing researchers with the legal access or the plant medicine in order to do this. So as we said, NIDA funds studies that have a particular bent. About 90% of their funding is looking for studies that show evidence of harm, abuse, and toxicity. Even with all those problems with the plant and getting funding and the security and all the things, they're still only allowed to look for what's wrong with the plant. And so the other 10% of studies, of course, they're going to look like they're inconclusive or that they're low on benefits. There's not enough of them. One of the good things that has come out of this is that we really understand how dangerous this plant is. Like, we know that it cannot kill you in its natural form. We know what happens to you when you take too much THC. We know that you're going to be okay. So it's great in one way that we have firm evidence on the dangers of what THC can do to us, but also it means that we haven't had all of these dozens of years of funding and studies to look at the benefits. Okay. However, this review in JAMA did think that Big Pharma's version of cannabinoids work, which is wonderful. I wonder how that works. So they said those medicines, including Marinol, Syndros, and Sesamet, are available by prescription at conventional pharmacies and have had good results in easing, and they list off a bunch of disorders. So on one hand, cannabis, not useful. On the other hand, cannabis produced by Big Pharma, really good. Wow, it worked super well. And ironically, what we do know about Marinol, which is just pure synthetic isolated THC with none of the terpenes or other cannabinoids that kind of help buffer THC's strong effects, people aren't using it. They're not continuing with their medication. They drop off because the side effects are so terrible. The other thing they said was that doctors don't understand cannabis. And we've had multiple studies about what doctors are being taught in medical school. This one showed that about 33% of clinicians globally were confident in their knowledge about medical cannabis, and 86% said they needed more education. And that's wonderful. I'm so glad that they're asking for more education. But what they are getting right now is abysmal. And so they don't understand when you're going to them in many cases is that they were not actually taught about the endocannabinoid system, even now in 2026. They just don't know. They don't have the knowledge to be able to prescribe. So that's why so many patients, myself included, were left to figure it out on our own. but they will offer you a pill to solve the problem. I had that experience multiple times telling my doctor that cannabis was helping with my depression. And she told me multiple times I needed to stop using cannabis and start using other prescription medications. And I was like, this is working. Can you hear? All right. The next big topic that they covered was pain. And this was the finding. Pain is a leading reason people use medical cannabis, but the review found no evidence to indicate that cannabis could ease acute pain. And I got almost to the end of that sentence before I read the word acute, and I was losing my mind because we have firm evidence that cannabis helps with pain. But they decided to focus on acute pain. And in most cases, acute pain, when we're talking about studies done in the literature, is post-operative pain. That's when they'll try out different substances to see how well it helps. So post-surgery acute pain, cannabis shows in the literature like mixed results. It's not like a for sure thing. You should try this for acute pain. Maybe some cannabinoids work better than others, but yeah, this is true. It doesn't work super well for acute pain, but it works really well for what most people are actually using it for, which is chronic pain. Did the JAMA article or the New York Times cover that portion? No, they did not. So I am going to fill you in. Multiple studies show that medical cannabis is comparable to opioids in terms of pain reduction, and that fewer people will discontinue their medication because of side effects. So they're able to ease their pain for longer without opiate side effects. It not only improves pain perception, and this is important, that cannabis often feels like it takes you away from the pain as opposed to like taking the pain away. You just don't kind of care so much about it. So it not only improves pain perception, but it also, for many people, helps with their sleep and their overall quality of life. And I'm going to show you a couple of screenshots here from my favorite place to research cannabis ever. It's called Cannabis. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, and it's also in the handout. So they compile all of the studies on cannabinoids worldwide, run by people who are medical cannabis experts, and they go through and categorize them all. It's so cool how you can use Cannabis. But this synopsis at the top, when I look up chronic pain, this shows me that we've had over 300 studies just on chronic pain and cannabinoids, including double-blind clinical trials, which are these gold standards, which apparently cannabis doesn't have. And you can see that there's been enough studies done on it that there's now guidance for physicians on how exactly to dose their patients. And also there's approval from the European Union for using cannabinoids for chronic pain. 80% of people who try it have a positive result, and in clinic, like with your doctor, close to 80%. Like, that's huge. So JAMA and the New York Times, they do almost admit in the article that cannabis might help with pain. They highlighted an analysis of 8 trials that said that some formation of THC and CBD could ease pain, although it made no discernible impact on function. Even so, the analysts felt that quality investigations were needed before they could draw a definitive conclusion. So, yes, it helps pain, but then because it doesn't actually fix the underlying issue, they're like, you should stop taking it. Well, most people aren't taking cannabis to fix the issue. They're taking cannabis because they're in pain and they want to be out of pain. Yes, we need more studies, but needing more studies doesn't mean that cannabis can't be the answer. And then in the meantime, they're going to offer you a pill. Do you see the pattern? So now we're on to sleep. And the researcher said that sleep trials had also produced weak or inconclusive results. Okay, this rings kind of true for me. Cannabis does not help everybody with sleep, and using the right cannabinoids is really important. And these studies mostly focused on CBD. And what we know is that most people who are using cannabis for sleep effectively are using THC and CBN, sometimes with CBD in there, but that those two are known as more like sleepy, restful cannabinoids. And that for many people, CBD is alerting. It feels kind of like a cup of coffee. And so once again, we're not studying what people are actually using for sleep in the real world. We're studying mostly CBD, which people are not turning to. you can see, again, this is from Cannabis, that we are mostly studying CBD around sleep and that we do have clinical guidance. It does help. It's not as great as the 80% for pain, but it does work. They also want to scare you that if me, everybody, if we are taking this to sleep, they say many daily users who inhale or ingest cannabis before bedtime attest to its success, noting that if they skip a night, they sleep poorly. Proof they maintain that cannabis works. But this researcher said that the return of insomnia when you don't take it for a night can suggest something else. It's withdrawal. The patient is in cannabis withdrawal. Of course, if I'm taking cannabis and it helps me sleep, and I do not take cannabis and I don't sleep well that night, maybe I'm in withdrawal, but that's what happens when you're taking medication to help you sleep and you do not take the medication, you don't sleep. So they're willing to offer you prescription medications that help you sleep only if you take them. But cannabis, we better stay away from. Okay, let's move on to cannabis for anxiety. This one I was like, oh, what are they going to say here? And they blew me away. This was insane that they're going to go this way. So they said for anxiety treatment, a new study showed that cannabis has mixed results. Researchers cited a trial of 80 veterans with PTSD and found no significant difference in the outcome among those who got cannabis with a wide range of doses of THC and those who got placebos. And I read this several times and I was like, oh, for anxiety, but then you're studying PTSD. Like these two don't track. Many veterans who have PTSD also had anxiety, but those are two separate conditions. And we know that THC, especially in higher doses, can really exacerbate anxiety. It can make it so much worse. So this part of this review is inflammatory. All of these parts of the review are inflammatory. They take a little kernel of truth and they're blowing it the wrong way. And then the New York Times, for whatever reason, is publishing this. And it's just actually not true what they're saying. Until one paragraph later, they say, actually, cannabis does help. They talked about taking cannabis CBD gummies. So they're like, those do work. Then they tell you, don't take CBD because medical societies are cautioning against treating psychiatric disorders with cannabis because it might make their condition worse, including things like and psychosis. So CBD works, but don't take it because it's going to make a psychiatric condition worse. Anxiety is a psychiatric condition. And Cannabis itself says that CBD offers promising therapeutic potential, including, this is where it gets me, including enhancing the efficacy of antipsychotics. So if a person was taking antipsychotics, possibly CBD might help those to work better, reduces side effects, and managing negative symptoms of psychosis. This whole review is just so that we can all learn that this is the devil's lettuce, and instead we can give you a prescription to help your anxiety. And here we get to the cannabis use disorder. So cannabis use disorder is a real disorder. People do suffer from it. This is very similar to any other addiction that you may have. And in this review, they found that about 30% of people who used medical cannabis had symptoms of this disorder. And I rolled my eyes because I already knew what they were going to do. But this sounds scary for people. If you're taking cannabis for your pain or your sleep, and then you read that you have a good chance of getting cannabis use disorder, that can be really off-putting and might send you back to a medicine that has far more side effects than this does. The New York Times went so far as to reference another study, not even the review that they're covering this whole time, but a different study that shows that maybe it's 34% of us who are going to get this terrible cannabis use disorder. So let's go through these criteria, check them off in your head. How many of these do you have? Okay. Because if you get two of them, if you check off two of them, you meet the criteria for cannabis use disorder. Are we ready? Using more than you originally planned to, wanting to cut down, but not being able to, spending a lot of time getting, using, or recovering. Do you have intense physical or mental urges to use? Are you missing your school, your work, or your home obligations? Are you continuing to use it despite the fact that your family and your friends are, you're in conflict with them? Have you given up your hobbies or your social events to use? Are you using it in dangerous situations? Are you continuing to use it despite health problems? I don't know how many fingers you have up. I probably have this disorder because sometimes I use more than I had planned to, and sometimes I want to stop and I'm not able. But here's where probably every one of us who uses cannabis medically is going to put these two fingers up. Tolerance, needing more to get the same effect. This is a regular thing that happens with many medications, and THC is no different. As you continue to use it, your body becomes tolerant to it, and you need to take more in order to get the same effects. The great news about THC is that you can take long breaks from it without any major health concerns, and you can start back down at your baseline again. But I'm sure most of us put up our finger for that. And withdrawal, when you stop taking it, you feel sick or irritable. If you put up your two fingers there, you also meet the criteria for this terrible disorder. And instead of fully elucidating that anywhere in the review or in the article, they just tell you, like, a whole bunch of you are going to get this bad thing. And this is where I was thinking about blood pressure med addicts, right? Like, if you take blood pressure medication and you take it every day, you will likely need to take more of it to get the same results. And if you stop taking it, your blood pressure will probably go up and your body will go into withdrawal and go back to its normal. If you have blood pressure medication, it's called dependence. And if it's cannabis, it's addiction. And that is such a terrible way to treat patients who are just using a plant because it works better for them. And it really pathologizes this whole thing. It really shows that they don't understand this plant and this medicine. They even decided to add this little ditty at the end just to make sure, like, if you weren't already terrified, they wanted you to have this too. So, aside from the approved prescription medications, cannabis is classified, along with heroin and LSD, is classified as having no medical purpose and a high propensity for misuse. Then they go on to say that in 2024, the Department of Justice proposed moving it to a less restrictive category. That is probably coming in the States. It is probably moving to a Schedule 3 medicine. But why did we have to put this into the article? Like, tell me this isn't inflammatory for the sake of being inflammatory, that they're like, oh, by the way, it's also just like heroin and LSD. Okay. Thank you so much for that. And when they're talking about why it's going to be moved to a Schedule 3, it's because this plant does not have a high propensity for addiction. It is medicinal. It has literally never killed a single person on the face of the earth ever in its natural form. So leave that part out. Thanks, New York Times. They end it by saying that we all need more trials so that patients have a better idea of what's going on. Thank you so much. Then they go on to say that cannabis companies are going to pay for these trials because they are so much money and they can sell their products without doing the trials. But that does leave this door wide open for pharmaceutical companies to come in and isolate different cannabinoids and claim them as proprietary so that they can offer you a pill with all their cannabis compilation or a pill of the other kind. So was every part of this article enraging to me? No, it wasn't. There was a couple of things in here that I was like, yeah, that's right. They specifically said, hey, you should not be inhaling cannabis for medical use because it can cause chronic bronchitis and you do take in toxins. That's true. They don't mention that there's a way to inhale cannabis with a dry herb vaporizer that eliminates both of those problems. But yeah, for sure. If we're using it for medical purposes, inhaling probably isn't the best. So they got that right. They also said in the article that yes, cannabis can work for some things, but there's a whole group of people who are just saying they're using it medically, but they're really not. They're just rationalizing their recreational use. And at first, I wanted to put this in with the, and then I realized that I felt very, very called out that I have in many times in my life used this plant medicinally because I needed it, and other times used it more recreationally because I really like it. And I'll tell people, like, I'm using this for my depression, but I'm really not. I'm using it because I want to have a fun Friday night. We know this from lots of literature that sometimes medical use does morph into recreational use and vice versa, that people are using it recreationally and then realizing, oh my gosh, this is helping with some medical issues I'm having as well. And who really cares in the end? Med versus rec is a made up distinction because of prohibition. So If you're using cannabis, maybe you're rationalizing it, maybe you're not. And they did highlight real risks. They said because there's no federal legislation, that dispensaries remain at risk for providing products that have mold, pesticides, and heavy metals. That's true. Every state regulates it their own way. There are problems. So like demand better. That's a real problem. All right. So we're at the end of the article. I'm like very fired up still. This isn't the way to approach it when somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, did you read the New York Times article?" You shouldn't like explode on them, but I'm going to give you some tips for how to deal with these kinds of things. And ironically, I got this quote from the New York Times in the same article. A doctor there said, "This underscores the importance of getting the education right and having better information for both clinicians and patients." That's why we do what we do at the Cannabis Institute, is to help people better understand this plant as a medicine so that more people can experience how beautiful it is. We know that fear-based marketing and articles and media drives clicks. Like, I understand the New York Times needs to get people to read their articles, so I get that. But as more and more and more and more of the world legalizes, we need more educated people. Everybody who loves this plant has a little bit of a responsibility to get themselves educated on how come this plant is so great. So let's get educated ourselves. In most cases, I'm going to recommend to my students that they start with the actual source. So that in most cases in PubMed, I love PubMed because you can see this beautiful graph where it shows you like how little research was being done and how much is being done right now. Oftentimes these studies are behind the paywall, but I have had great success myself by reaching out to the authors of the studies and saying like, "Hey, would you mind providing this to me?" It's also a great place to go and counter all the people who say, "We need more studies on cannabis. There hasn't been enough research on cannabis, blah, blah, blah." So far, there's been 41,000 studies on cannabis in PubMed. Like, we're okay. We're doing okay. Um, However, I am not a scientist and PubMed sometimes scares the out of me. So this is our favorite website ever at the Cannabis Institute. It's called Cannakeys. This is that website that I was showing you some screenshots of earlier. When you get inside of it, you can filter all of the studies done on cannabis by cannabinoid or terpene or organ system or medical condition. So when I was researching, I was going into pain acute and pain chronic because they have several different types of pain. And then I was looking at anxiety and sleep. You can see they have studies on feels like everything. It also has blurbs written by the researchers who run the site that helps it put it into like not Dr. Ease or not scientist ease so that you can really understand it. And when I say you can search by cannabinoids, I mean cannabinoids. Like they go through every one that we've ever studied, plus the synthetic versions, plus the endocannabinoids. So you can really search by anything. And this is very helpful. If you want to deep dive on the medical benefits of cannabis, a subscription to this site is totally worth it. I think it's like 25 bucks a month and you can just be a little nerd to your heart's content. However, if you are not going to be that nerdy, I'm going to give you some more sites. These are all listed in the handout. So here's some more sites that you can visit. This one has the worst name. The Canadian Consortium for the Investigation of Cannabinoids. They need some marketing help, but it's a great global repository of studies and cannabis scientists and cannabis doctors who are over there talking, and you can like peer in on them. The Society of Cannabis Clinicians is the American version of this, and it's also got excellent information. Project CBD, too bad their name is this because they also really dive deep into other cannabinoids, and it is very user friendly. Project CBD is where you can send your aunt who doesn't want to dive deep but wants to know about CBD. You can send her there to those articles. And finally, Americans for Safe Access really focuses on why it's so important that medical cannabis is available to every American. This site has a lot of things for you to go and look at if you're passionate about medical cannabis. And like I said, all of those are on the handout. Okay, so you're going to go do some research. And while you're doing some research, especially if you are in Cannakeys or PubMed, you're going to ask these questions. First of all, who paid for this study? Because if it was in the United States, it's super likely that NIDA funded it. And you know that they're looking for problems. What's their definition of a cannabis user? In many cannabis studies, they are lumped in with those who use illicit drugs, alcohol, nicotine. That's not the case for many of us. What exactly did they study? Are they studying whole plant cannabis? Did they get it from NIDA? Are they studying isolates? Is it THC or one of the multi other cannabinoids? Are they having the study participants inhale it? Or are they doing things like nasal sprays? There's so many studies that are done on nasal sprays, and I have literally never seen anyone take a THC nasal spray. So find out what they studied, because oftentimes it's not real world evidence. And then check out doses and timelines. In many studies, they use them for a really short amount of time. And we know that for cannabinoid therapy, that you need to commit to a couple of months of trial of figuring out what works for you and what cannabinoids and doses work for you. So check out how long they spent on it. Okay, and here we are at the end. In the end, we have been using this plant for thousands of years. You are here because you have had an experience with this plant. Your experience is valid, right? My experience of using cannabis to pull me out of a deep depression in one puff, that's real. Even if I come across a New York Times article that tells me differently, as science is just starting to catch up. We didn't know that we had an endocannabinoid system 35 years ago. So your intuition, your ancient wisdom, it's valid, right? Okay, if you also want to be a certified cannabis coach or educator so that your inbox can be flooded with people asking you about New York Times articles, you should take our free class. It's called The 3 Steps to Launching Your Cannabis Wellness Business. And in it, we show you the multitude of ways that you can turn this passion into a business and at the same time really help people understand this plant for what it is. The link is in the handout. And also, our May class for our Cannabis Educator and Coach program is enrolling right now. In a couple of days, there's going to be a one-day flash sale with the code 420. And you get $420 off tuition, but I'll give that to you now so you don't have to wait for that to come up. And because Corinne's not here, the 420 sale is also on the payment plans. So hold on to that code if you would like to enroll and be part of our May cohort. So if anybody has a Q, I will try to provide an A.
It's too bad you're not at all passionate about this.
Yeah, I get pretty fired up. I was like really mad earlier when I was just reading it before we got on. I realized I was like, I should probably check my blood pressure because I'm off about this. So this is my uncle who's on right now. You know what I went through. My mom's here too. My mom is the one who gave me the weed that I rolled into a joint 2 months later, being a terrible mom who was going to smoke this devil's lettuce and like ruin my life. And that one puff pulled me out of like a depression. So I'm passionate about this plant because I'm here because of it. And I don't want to read like that in the New York Times.
And you nailed it exactly right, that publications like the Times is looking for engagement, clicks, and accuracy becomes secondary.
Yeah, I had more faith in the New York Times. To be honest, like I'm probably very naive about it, but I had more faith in that publication. And ironically, they were the first national publication in 2014 to call for the decriminalization of cannabis. At that time, the New York Times was really focused on racial inequities, and they were highlighting the fact that the vast majority of people arrested and then incarcerated for low-level cannabis crimes are people of color. And so they were like, we can't keep doing this to the Black kids in this nation. And it was the beginning of a movement. All right, questions, or should we move on to celebrations?
This is Trisha.
Hi, Trisha.
Hi, everybody. So I'm a graduate of May 2021. I used to live in Hawaii. I learned how to make a really great salve. My celebration is that I'm retired. I'm going to turn 70 in July. And we just bought a Ford F-250 and a fifth wheel. So I have a 20-foot truck and a 30-foot trailer, and we're going to travel the United States. And I'm so excited to just have a new life, a new journey. And I'm going to have to be real discreet about cannabis going into state parks. So I'm just really excited to share that part of my journey. It's been a really interesting with cannabis, going to the Cannabis Institute and selling and then getting raided at a farm. It was really interesting. But I'm really glad that I went to this institute and learned what I did and met so many wonderful people. I hope that if any of you are thinking about it, that you will take it, because it changed my life completely in understanding the plant. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Tricia. All right. Hi, Lori.
Okay. I wanted to celebrate because today I just did my first cannabis coaching guide. I
Cool.
filled it all in and I emailed it to my client. And I was so proud of myself.
That's amazing. What is your client struggling with? What's the guide about?
ADHD. And I am going to have her try CBD oil. I had told her that because I'm a sissy when it comes to flavors and things like that. So I take my CBD oil that I made and I put it in a capsule. And she said that she would also be interested in doing that. So I'm going to have her start with that, the CBG and CBD oil. It's a full spectrum oil.
Of course it is. That's wonderful, Lori. I'm really excited to hear about that.
It was so much fun and I felt so good doing it. And when I got it all done, I was like, woohoo!
It's so rewarding to be able to help
Oh.
somebody understand this.
I mean, because I know what a difference it made for me. And if I can do that for her and for anybody else, and I already have somebody else that she's from another state, and she said, I'm going to be coming in at the end of the month. She goes, can we get together? I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Thanks so much for sharing, Lori. I really appreciate it. Lori just graduated last month, people.
last
Okay.
month.
Yeah. So she's not already. Who else is celebrating? Okay, Christy, go for it.
I'm a student with the Cannabis Institute, and hopefully I'll be graduating at the end of this month. I'm excited about that. And I'm in Louisiana. I do have a question. So in working with the clients and such, and helping them with different like CBD and THC oil, is it that most people are going to get that from the dispensaries? I mean, we're going to be working with the dispensaries and clients to help them get the medicine they need.
It's a really wide spectrum. So I personally work with clients now worldwide. So I'll break this down. In some cases, you are going to be researching where they live close to and researching that dispensary and going to the dispensary menu and trying to find products that you think will help them feel better. Many coaches and educators, especially in the States, will partner with brands that they trust. So Joy Organics is one that people like, and same with Dr. Dustin Sulak's Healer website, also really good medicine. In both those cases, there is a chance to also have an affiliate commission if that's something that's interesting to you. They are well-sourced products and products that we can trust. And in both those cases, they ship to almost every state. So keeping those two websites in mind is a good idea. And then the third use case is I often help clients make their own. I have tons of guides that I have made up. And if any of our students or grads wants them, let me know. I'll give them to you. You can just rebrand them and make them your own to help people walk through the process of infusing medicine or putting your medicine into a capsule or, all the things. So, and then some people do, especially coaches who would prefer to work in person, will go with their clients to the dispensary and help them understand how that system works. And that is a huge benefit to help them get used to it. I always feel like my job is to wean my clients off me so they don't need me anymore because they know what they're doing now. So having that service available is important, I think, too.
Great. Yeah. Thanks.
Great question, Christy. All right. Any other celebrations? Questions? Look at us. Did we get it done in exactly 60 minutes? We're number one. I really appreciate everybody for being here.